I don't even remember how we got on the subject during the break, KJ, but you mentioned the movie All the Right Moves, the 80s Tom Cruise high school football movie. My high
If we
school
make the
football
right
coach,
move.
yeah,
Yeah.
my high school football coach actually has a cameo as one of the
What?
opposing coaches. Yes, Don Yanessa. Yes. Because they
Oh
filmed it
wow.
like an
Is
hour
he
from
the
my
coach of?
house. Yeah.
Oh wow. I wonder if he's the coach that recovered the fumble that cost Tom Cruise his entire football career without giving away the movie.
No spoilers, KJ. No spoilers. The movie's only been out for 40 years. Come on.
40
Anyway,
years, right? Yeah.
we'll get into these NFC East superlatives and some of the ones that we have left to discuss in just a minute. But we were kicking around the idea of what preseason football will look like in, say, the next decade or so during the break. And we thought we'd bring that conversation on the air because I think it's a really interesting one. Like, I foresee a day. Mike Florio was on 93.7 The Fan in Pittsburgh last week saying, hey, he could foresee a day where there's 20 preseason games or 20 regular season games, no preseason games. That's not that far off into the future. It's kind of on the horizon, really. We're going to go from 17 to 18 very soon, and then before you know it, we'll be at 20 regular season games and a Super Bowl in March before you know it. And that's not hyperbole. That's really what we're headed for within the next decade to decade and a half, probably. But at that point, what does the preseason look like? Is it these controlled scrimmages, these dual combo practices? Because every time one of these happens, you seemingly have some sort of altercation at some point during these joint practices. And, it can lead to injuries. We've seen it happen in some cases. We saw a Cowboys coach get hurt in the middle of a fight earlier this week. Like, it's just not as controlled as a preseason game can be. Nobody wants preseason football, but is it in some cases maybe safer than a joint practice or a controlled scrimmage?
Well, first, to your comments about Mike Florio saying there'll be a 20-game season, I think the league, and even from a bettor's perspective, you'd want that number to be an odd number. So I could see it going to 19. I know that's not far from 20, but at the same time, also you'd rather see a team, so no team can go 10-10. Like either you got to go 10-9 or 9-10, right? So I think that's going to happen. Plus, that helps with hooks that are built in, right? Like, will a team win over 10.5 games, right? So you don't want to see a lot of pushes. And in terms of the joint practice, man, I can't stand it. And it doesn't make sense. Ask Devontae Adams right now what he thinks of joint practices. Ask Russell Gage in Tampa what does he think of joint practices. These guys are going at full speed on subpar surfaces, right? This is not the same thing as what you're doing in the stadium. This is why I say, hey, do the preseason games. Don't do these joint practices. Like, let's say a player runs out of bounds, right? When they're running out of bounds at your stadium, they're running out of bounds. They've got their whole line of teammates there. There's still the equipment. The fans are still a good 10 yards away from the sideline. Mm-hmm. But in these joint practices, it's like you've got one or two Gatorade coolers you're going to hit, and then comes the fans right there, sitting right there on some metal seats probably. It's not the environment for these guys who, let's just call it what it is. It's the most injury-prone sport in America, and you're letting these guys do it in spaces that aren't even the confinements that they can get the maximum out of what they're supposed to do. How do you go down on a practice field versus knowing what you need to do on a professional field? So, I think we're just a major player being injured in one of these joint practices. And here's the other thing. These fights that would get you kicked out of games immediately, there's 6 or 7 of them sometimes per these joint practices. Now, people say it's stupid to slap a guy against his head. What's the point? He's got a helmet on. But hello, if the guy may have had a history of a concussion, it might suddenly ring a small bell that doesn't show up into the regular season. And if he gets hit again, you won't be able to tell. So you need more of these better controlled environments. I hate to sound like Professor KJ here, but keep these guys in the best controlled environments if you're trying to get more out of them. It's like playing the NBA, like playing an NBA tournament at the YWCA in the middle of December.
Professor KJ, will you sign my yearbook, please? Which brings us back to NFC East superlatives. Yeah.